told me to run to the woods as fast as I could, and then grab Jacob.
The man who led investigators to Jacob Wetterling's body has admitted to killing him. On Tuesday, Danny Heinrich pleaded guilty to one count of receiving child pornography before telling the court in detail how he kidnapped and killed the 11-year-old boy. In 1989, Wetterling was riding his bike with two other boys when a man in a mask approached them and kidnapped him. The case was cold until his body was found early this month.
Love you, Jacob. We will continue to fight. Our hearts are hurting. We will try and pull. I would love to talk to you all. I'm just not ready yet, because for us, Jacob was alive.
On a cold October night in 1989, three boys were just minutes from home when a masked man stepped out of the darkness with a gun. Within seconds, one child was gone. No screams, no witnesses. Just a quiet rural road at a family that would spend the next 27 years asking the same question: what happened to Jacob Wetterling? But what makes this case even more disturbing is that investigators may have encountered the killer within weeks and let him walk. What happened next wouldn't just haunt a family, it would change how America protects its children forever. Jacob Wetterling was just 11 years old. He lived in St. Joseph, Minnesota, a quiet rural town where people didn't lock their doors, where kids rode their bikes freely, and where danger felt like something that only existed somewhere else. It was the kind of place where parents felt safe letting their children play outside until the streetlights came on, the kind of place where nothing like this was supposed to happen. On the evening of October 26, 1989, everything felt normal. Jacob had spent the day with his family doing simple things: fishing, watching football, the kind of moments that, at the time, felt ordinary, but would later become the last memories his family would hold on to. That night, Jacob stayed home with his younger brother Trevor and his friend Aaron. They were just kids doing what kids did, laughing, hanging out, trying to decide what movie to watch. Eventually, they came up with a plan. They wanted to ride their bikes into town to rent a movie from a nearby store. At first, their mother said no. It was dark and they lived outside town. But their father hesitated, and then said yes as long as they wore reflective gear and brought a flashlight. It was a small decision, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. So the three boys got on their bikes and rode into the night. The trip into town was uneventful. They picked out a movie, joked around, and started heading back home. But as they left the lights of town behind, everything changed. The road became darker, quieter, the kind of silence that feels normal until it doesn't. Just minutes from Jacob's house, on a gravel driveway surrounded by fields, a man suddenly appeared out of the darkness. He was dressed entirely in black. His face was covered with a mask, and in his hand was a gun. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but would echo for decades.
We were just talking and everything, and then this guy just came out and he had a gun, I thought it was some kid pulling a prank on us or something, and then but it wasn't.
What's this man look like?
Well, he was all in black. He had a mask on, and
You couldn't see his face?
He had a nylon mask or some kind of mask.
Did Jacob say anything to the man?
Just his age.
When you ran, did you look back?
Yeah, once we got way down there.
What did you see?
Nothing. No, he wasn't there anymore.
And just like that, an ordinary night in a quiet town turned into one of the most haunting child abduction cases in American history. Because that moment on that empty gravel road was the last time anyone would ever see Jacob Wetterling alive. Can you imagine being told to run and leave your friend behind? Trevor and Aaron ran. They didn't stop. They didn't think. They just ran as fast as they could through the darkness, down the gravel road, back toward the only place that felt safe. Their lungs burned, their legs shook, but fear kept them moving. Behind them, somewhere in that pitch-black night, their friend had just disappeared. When they finally reached the house, everything came out at once: panic, confusion, fragments of what had just happened. The words barely made sense at first. Someone took Jacob. A man with a gun. He made us lie down. He told us to run. There was no time to process it. The adults inside immediately realized this wasn't a joke, not a misunderstanding. Something was terribly wrong. Within minutes, a call was made to emergency services. One of the boys is missing, someone took him. The message was urgent, but incomplete. The person calling hadn't seen the abduction firsthand. They were relaying what two terrified children had just told them, and that meant the details were scattered, emotional, and difficult to piece together in real time. Still, the core fact was clear: an 11-year-old boy had been taken at gunpoint. But what happened next would later become one of the most scrutinized parts of this entire case. When officers first arrived, they didn't immediately treat the situation as a confirmed abduction. Instead, they questioned Trevor and Aaron, trying to make sense of their story. The idea that a masked man had appeared out of nowhere, forced them into a ditch, and taken only one child, it sounded unusual, even improbable. Investigators considered other possibilities, that Jacob had run off, that the boys were confused, or that something else had happened they weren't explaining clearly. And while those questions were being asked, time was passing. No immediate roadblocks were set up. No perimeter was locked down in those first crucial moments. There was no rapid, coordinated sweep of the surrounding area right away. By the time a full-scale search effort began involving officers, volunteers, and eventually helicopters, it was already around 10:45 p.m. Roughly 90 minutes had passed since Jacob was last seen. And in cases like this, those first minutes matter more than anything. When the search teams finally reached the area near the gravel driveway, they found only a few pieces of physical evidence. There were tire tracks, footprints, signs that something had happened, but nothing that pointed clearly in one direction. No vehicle was identified. No suspect was immediately located, just silence. And here's the part that makes this even more unsettling. During that hour, the person who took Jacob may not have been far at all. He could have still been in the area, driving, hiding, watching, listening to police radio traffic. We know now that the suspect had access to a police scanner, meaning he could have been aware of every move law enforcement was making, in real time. That window, that lost time, may have been the only chance to stop him. And it slipped away. This is where the frustration begins to build, because looking back, knowing what we know now, it raises a difficult question, one that investigators, the public, and Jacob's family have all had to confront over the years. Does this feel like a critical mistake to you? In the days and weeks following Jacob Wetterling's disappearance, investigators began doing what they always do in cases like this, canvassing the area, interviewing locals, and building a list of potential suspects. In a small town like St. Joseph, that meant talking to people who lived nearby, people who had been seen on the roads that night, and anyone whose behavior raised even the slightest concern. And very early on, one name surfaced: Danny Heinrich. At the time, Heinrich was a local resident who lived not far from where Jacob was taken. When investigators looked into him, several details immediately stood out. First, he didn't have a clear, verifiable alibi for the night of October 22, 1989. In a case where timing was everything, that alone was enough to draw attention. But there was more. Heinrich was known to have access to a police scanner, a device that allowed him to listen in on law enforcement radio communications. In a situation like Jacob's abduction, that detail carried serious weight. It meant that if he had been involved, he could have monitored police activity in real time, adjusting his movements, staying one step ahead. And then there were concerns about his behavior. Investigators had reason to believe that Heinrich had shown inappropriate interest in young boys. While not enough on its own to prove anything, it added another layer of suspicion, a pattern that, when viewed alongside everything else, was difficult to ignore. So they brought him in. He was questioned multiple times. During these interviews, Heinrich cooperated. He answered questions, provided samples, and allowed investigators to examine aspects of his life. On the surface, there was no clear moment where everything clicked, no confession, no undeniable piece of evidence tying him directly to Jacob's disappearance. But looking at the bigger picture, the red flags were there. And yet, despite all of this, the lack of a solid alibi, the access to a police scanner, the behavioral concerns, investigators didn't have enough to hold him. The physical evidence from the scene wasn't definitive. The tire tracks and footprints couldn't be conclusively linked to him. And without that direct connection, the case against him stalled. So he was released. And as time went on, the investigation began to move in other directions. But here's what makes this moment so difficult to process. Decades later, in 2016, Danny Heinrich would finally confess to abducting and murdering Jacob Wetterling. In his official statement, he described the moment of decision in chillingly simple terms. "I just decided I was going to take one of them. Not a crime of passion. Not a spontaneous act of chaos. A decision. A deliberate choice made in the dark, while 3 children rode their bikes home." And that's what changes everything when you look back at those early interviews. Because it means that while investigators were asking questions, while they were trying to piece together what happened, the person responsible may have already been sitting right in front of them. I gotta be honest, this is the part that really makes my blood boil. Because it raises a question that's hard to ignore, not just about this case, but about how investigations unfold under pressure, with limited evidence and impossible stakes. How close were they to stopping him right there? As weeks turned into months and months into years, the investigation into Jacob Wetterling's disappearance began to drift into something far more difficult: uncertainty. The initial urgency faded, but the search never truly stopped. Tips started pouring in from everywhere. Locals, strangers, people who thought they saw something that night, people who remembered something years later. At one point, investigators had accumulated tens of thousands of leads, nearly 70,000 tips connected to the case. Every single one had to be reviewed, documented, and followed up. But here's the problem. The more information you have, the harder it becomes to see what actually matters. Investigators chased down countless suspects. Some matched the composite sketch, some were reported by concerned citizens, others came forward themselves, claiming responsibility for the crime. But again and again, these leads went nowhere. Confessions fell apart under scrutiny, alibis checked out, physical evidence didn't match. And slowly, the case began to lose direction. This is where things take a turn not just frustrating, but deeply troubling. At one point, suspicion shifted heavily toward a man named Dan Rassier. He lived near the area where Jacob was abducted, at the end of that same rural stretch of road. For investigators, proximity became a key factor. Over time, the focus on Rassier intensified. Authorities executed search warrants on his property. They excavated parts of his land. Media helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting the search live. His name, his face, everything about him was suddenly tied to one of the most high-profile child abduction cases in the country. But there was one problem. There was no solid evidence linking him to the crime. No DNA, no physical proof, no confession, yet the damage was already done. His reputation was shattered, his life was turned upside down. And even as years passed, that shadow never fully disappeared. For many watching from the outside, he had already been judged not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And this is where the investigation reveals something much bigger than just one case. When pressure builds, when a case goes cold, when answers don't come, investigators can start focusing too narrowly. One theory, one suspect, one direction. And sometimes that focus can come at a cost, because while attention was being directed at the wrong person, the real suspect was still out there, still free, still unnoticed. The case of Jacob Wetterling didn't just go cold, it became tangled in its own complexity. Too many leads, too many possibilities, and not enough certainty. That's what makes this part of the story so difficult to sit with, because it forces you to ask a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Was this tunnel vision, or simply the result of not having enough evidence at the time? What do you think, tunnel vision or lack of evidence? And if you've been following this case so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what happens next after decades of silence is something no one saw coming. 9 months before Jacob Wetterling vanished into the darkness, something eerily similar had already happened. In January of 1989, a 12-year-old boy named Jared Shearl was walking home in Cold Spring, Minnesota, just a short distance from St. Joseph. It was late, quiet, the kind of night where nothing feels out of place until it suddenly does. A man pulled up beside him in a car. He asked for directions. And then, just like that, everything changed. The man got out, told Jared he had a gun, and ordered him into the vehicle. Jared was forced into the back seat, told to lie face down, and instructed not to look at him. As the car moved through the dark, Jared tried to keep track of where he was going, counting turns, listening carefully, doing anything he could to stay aware. But eventually, the man stopped. What followed was an assault, one that investigators would later confirm bore chilling similarities to what happened to Jacob. And then, something unexpected. The man drove Jared back toward town and let him go, but not before delivering a threat that would echo months later in Jacob's case. "Run, don't look back, or I'll shoot." The wording wasn't just similar, it was nearly identical. At the time, law enforcement did take notice of the similarities between the two cases. The FBI even considered the possibility that the same individual could be responsible. Both incidents involved young boys, rural roads, nighttime encounters, a gun, and that same cold, controlled command. But despite those parallels, the connection was never fully solidified. The cases remained separate, and that decision, whether due to limited evidence, jurisdictional boundaries, or simply the complexity of the investigations, would have lasting consequences. Because this wasn't just about two isolated incidents. In the nearby town of Paynesville, there had already been reports of suspicious behavior involving young boys. Accounts of a man approaching children, watching, following, testing boundaries. Nothing definitive enough on its own to trigger a major break, but together they formed a pattern. A pattern that, at the time, wasn't fully assembled. Looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight, the signs feel impossible to ignore. The method, the location, the victim profile, the threats, the timing, it all fits. But in real time it didn't. Investigators were working across different cases, different jurisdictions, different pieces of evidence that didn't quite align strongly enough to confirm a single suspect. Without DNA matches, without direct physical links, everything remained circumstantial, and so the cases moved forward separately. This is where the frustration deepens. Because when you step back and look at it now, it's hard not to see the outline of something much larger, a pattern that was already forming, already repeating, already escalating. A suspect who was getting closer, more confident, more dangerous, and yet still unidentified. This wasn't just a missed connection, it was a missed opportunity. An opportunity to stop someone before it went further, before another child disappeared, before Jacob. The horrifying truth is the pattern existed, the warning signs were there, the similarities had been noticed, but they were never fully connected in time. And that's what makes this part of the story so unsettling. Not just because of what happened, but because of what might have been prevented. Because sometimes, in cases like this, it's not about one mistake. It's about the small gaps between cases, the spaces where critical connections fail to form, and in those gaps someone slips through. For nearly 3 decades, the case of Jacob Wetterling sat in that painful space between hope and silence. Leads had been exhausted, suspects had come and gone, and the evidence, what little there was, never quite pointed strongly enough in one direction. But by 2015, something had changed. Technology had caught up. Investigators decided to take another look at evidence from the earlier case involving Jared Sherrill, the 12-year-old boy abducted and assaulted just 9 months before Jacob disappeared. Back in 1989, biological evidence had been collected from Jared's clothing, but at the time, the technology simply wasn't advanced enough to extract a usable DNA profile. Now, decades later, it was using modern forensic methods. Analysts were able to recover DNA from that preserved evidence, and when they ran it through databases and compared it with previous persons of interest, the result pointed to a familiar name, Danny Heinrich, the same man who had been questioned early in the investigation, the same man who had raised suspicions but had ultimately been released due to lack of evidence. This time, it was different. The DNA match connected Heinrich directly to Jared's assault. But there was a devastating complication: the statute of limitations for that crime had already expired. That meant prosecutors could not charge him for what he had done to Jared even with a confirmed DNA match. Still, it was the break investigators had been waiting for. With that evidence, law enforcement obtained a search warrant for Heinrich's home. What they found inside only deepened the case against him. Investigators recovered items including restraints and a significant amount of child exploitation material, evidence that established a disturbing pattern of behavior over many years. Heinrich was arrested and charged on federal counts related to child pornography. For the first time in decades, there was real pressure, real leverage, and this is where everything began to move quickly. Facing serious federal charges, Heinrich was now in a position he had never been in before. Investigators had something concrete, something that tied him to a crime, something that couldn't be explained away. And while they still didn't have direct physical evidence linking him to Jacob, they now had a path forward. Behind the scenes, negotiations began. Prosecutors were faced with a difficult decision. They wanted answers not just for the case, but for Jacob's family, who had lived for 27 years without knowing what had happened to their son. They needed a confession. They needed a location. They needed closure. Eventually, a deal was reached. In exchange for leading investigators to Jacob's remains and providing a full confession, Heinrich would not be charged with murder. Instead, he would face sentencing on the federal charges already in place. It was controversial, deeply controversial. But for the investigators and for the Wetterling family, it meant something that had been missing for nearly 3 decades, a chance to finally know the truth. After 27 years of silence, the case was about to break open. And what came next would bring answers, but also raise one of the hardest questions of all. Was this justice or just the closest thing they could get to it? In September 2016, after nearly 27 years of unanswered questions, the case of Jacob Wetterling finally reached its breaking point. Danny Heinrich agreed to talk. Sitting with investigators, he gave a full confession, not vague, not partial, but detailed. He described the night of October 22, 1989, step by step. He admitted that he had been driving around the area, that he saw the 3 boys riding their bikes, and that he made a decision in that moment, a decision that would destroy a family and haunt a nation. He approached them, just as Trevor and Aaron had described: the mask, the gun, the commands. He confirmed everything. He told investigators that he forced Jacob into his car and drove away from the scene, eventually taking him to a remote area. There, according to court documents, Jacob was assaulted. Heinrich said that when he became afraid of being caught, he shot Jacob, and then he left him there. For years, that was the part no one knew. Not the public, not investigators, not even Jacob's family. For nearly 3 decades, they had lived in a space where anything felt possible, where hope, no matter how small, still existed. That hope ended with this confession. But Heinrich didn't just talk. He led investigators to a rural location, a pasture not far from where the abduction had taken place. Using his directions, authorities searched the area and found human remains, clothing, fragments of evidence that confirmed what no one wanted to accept. It was Jacob. After 27 years, he had been there the entire time. For the Wetterling family, the moment was devastating but also final. The uncertainty was gone. The waiting was over. They could finally bring their son home. Jacob Wetterling was laid to rest in a place where his family could visit him, something they had been denied for nearly 3 decades. But even in that moment of closure, the case left behind a complicated question. Because of the agreement made with prosecutors, Heinrich was never charged with murder. Instead, he was sentenced on federal charges related to child exploitation, receiving a 20-year prison sentence. For some, that felt like a failure of justice. For others, it was the only way to get the truth. And that's what makes this ending so difficult to process. Because justice and closure aren't always the same thing. Jacob's mother, Patty Wetterling, said something that has stayed with many people who followed this case. She explained that for all those years, her family chose to believe that Jacob was still alive, that somewhere, somehow, he would come home. But now, they finally knew. And with that truth came a different kind of peace. I couldn't stop thinking about how close he was all those years, just miles away, hidden in plain sight. This case didn't just change one family, it changed the country. Jacob's story led to new laws, new systems, and a new way of tracking offenders, all designed to prevent something like this from ever happening again. But even with those changes, the questions remain. What do you guys think? Is this justice or just closure?
I hope you hear her cries as you try to sleep at night. I hope you see the tears run down her face when she asked you to go home. I hope you spend the rest of your life in fear of death. You will never hurt another child again. Judge Howard, speaking for myself, for my community, and the nation, I plead with you to accept the recommendation of the jury for death as presented to you by the jury 10-2.
And for the murder of Jessica Marie Lunsford, this court sentences you, John Evander Cooey, to death.
The state of Florida never got the chance to execute Cooey. He died Wednesday of natural causes at a hospital. A Department of Corrections spokeswoman says Cooey had been ill for some time. The 51-year-old was sentenced to death in 2007 for kidnapping 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford from her bedroom in 2005 and raping and murdering her.
On a February night in 2005 in Florida, an unlocked door paved the way for a monster to snatch 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford right from her own bed. Her mysterious disappearance sparked a turbulent investigation, exposing police missteps and a suffocatingly cruel crime committed by a neighbor. Yet rising above the depths of this tragedy and a father's desperate tears, a powerful legacy was born. This is the journey of turning unimaginable pain into a legal shield that now protects millions of children across America. In the sleepy, laid-back town of Homosassa, Florida, a place where people often move to escape the fast-paced rhythm of the city, 9-year-old Jessica Marie Lunsford lived a life surrounded by profound love. Affectionately known to her family as Jessie, she was a remarkably sweet, obedient, and somewhat shy little girl. To those who knew her best, she was the ultimate daddy's girl, sharing an unbreakable bond with her single father, Mark Lunsford. They were inseparable, with Jessie often accompanying him to work, riding along on his motorcycle, and singing her favorite songs. To give her the best life possible, Mark and Jessie had moved into a quiet trailer park to live in a multi-generational home with her grandparents, Archie and Ruth. Despite her cheerful demeanor in the warm Florida environment, Jessie was a timid child who suffered from a deep, paralyzing fear of the dark, requiring multiple nightlights just to fall asleep. On the evening of February 23, 2005, the family's peaceful existence was entirely normal. Jessie attended her usual Wednesday church youth group, came home and played happily with her father before he left for a date. Her grandmother, Ruth, tucked her into bed around 10 p.m., laying out her clothes for the following day. But that quiet normalcy shattered into an unimaginable nightmare in the early hours of the morning. When Mark returned home around dawn to get ready for work, he was greeted by the relentless blaring of his daughter's alarm clock. Assuming she was just in a deep sleep, he walked into her bedroom to wake her. Instead, he found an empty bed. Panic quickly set in as Mark desperately searched every room of the trailer and then sprinted outside screaming her name into the cool morning air, his confusion turning into sheer terror. The scene inside the house was chillingly undisturbed. There were absolutely no signs of forced entry, no shattered windows, and no indications of a violent struggle. Jessie's school clothes for the next day were still neatly laid out at the foot of her bed, completely untouched. However, Mark soon realized a horrifying detail. The front door of the trailer had been left unlocked the night before. An unknown presence had slipped in and out like a ghost in the night. The only item missing from the entire house was Jessie's prized possession, a large purple stuffed dolphin that Mark had recently won for her at the local state fair, which she had been carrying everywhere for comfort. The family knew instantly that their little girl, terrified of the dark and incredibly attached to her father, would never wander out into the black of night on her own accord. The realization that someone had taken her prompted a frantic, heart-stopping call to the authorities. The sheer desperation of that moment was captured forever in the chilling 911 recording.
Emergency? Yes, we got a child missing. How old's the child? 9. She's 9 years old? Yeah.
Operator, 911 emergency. What is your emergency? Grandmother Ruth. Yes, we have a missing child. Operator, how old is the child? Did she run away? Grandmother Ruth. She's 9 years old. No, she would never run away. She's gone. She's not here. I need help.
Can you tell me your name? Jessie. Okay, how old are you?
When a child vanishes without a trace from the supposed safety of their own home, law enforcement protocols dictate a rigid and often unforgiving starting point. According to the FBI's standard operating procedures, investigators must always focus first on ground zero, the immediate family members and those with direct physical access to the victim. Tragically, in the desperate search for 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford, this standard investigative protocol morphed into a grueling psychological ordeal for her already devastated family. Almost immediately, the investigative lens aggressively narrowed on Jessica's father, Mark Lunsford, and her grandfather, Archie. While Mark's timeline was eventually verified, the police relentlessly zeroed in on Archie, who had been asleep in the trailer that night. The foundation of their suspicion was shockingly superficial and completely disregarded the complex, unpredictable nature of human trauma. Detectives explicitly targeted the elderly grandfather simply because he did not weep, scream, or physically collapse during his intense interrogations. Because Archie internalized his agonizing fear and processed his waking nightmare with a stoic, quiet demeanor, rather than displaying visible tears, the police hastily labeled him a cold-hearted suspect, refusing to accept that grief does not always look the same. Determined to break what they believed was a wall of deception, law enforcement resorted to unimaginably cruel psychological tactics. In a deeply disturbing maneuver, investigators blatantly lied to Mark. They falsely informed the terrified father that forensic teams had discovered Jessica's blood on Archie's underwear. Their calculated goal was to completely shatter the family's trust, manipulating the vulnerable father into turning against his own dad. They forced Mark into a sterile interrogation room, effectively ordering him to act as an agent of the state and personally interrogate the man who had raised him. The resulting encounter was a heartbreaking display of a grieving family being torn apart by the very people meant to help them. Inside the cold room, the emotional toll was palpable.
They want me to ask you if you know where Jesse's at. I'm sorry, Dad. I know you're sorry. No, just forgive me that I have to ask you.
The consequences of this misdirected focus were absolutely catastrophic. While detectives spent their time administering polygraph tests, manufacturing cruel lies, and psychologically torturing an innocent father and grandfather, the real monster was slipping through their fingers. 3 precious, irreplaceable golden days of the investigation were completely wasted on a baseless witch hunt within the family's home. In child abduction cases, the first 72 hours are universally recognized as the most critical window for bringing a victim home alive. Instead of utilizing that vital time to actively hunt down the actual predator lurking just across the street, authorities squandered at a fatal misdirection that not only compounded the family's unjust suffering, but ultimately cost Jessica her life. After 3 grueling days of intense interrogations that yielded nothing but the shattered nerves of an innocent family, authorities finally conceded that Mark and Archie Lunsford had no involvement in Jessica's disappearance. With the family officially cleared, investigators drastically shifted their focus outward, realizing they were likely dealing with a stranger abduction. The investigation gained fresh momentum when detectives re-examined the crime scene and discovered a crucial, previously overlooked detail: an L-shaped cut in a window screen on the porch of the Lunsford home. This precise burglar's cut definitively confirmed the terrifying theory that an intruder had deliberately sliced the mesh to reach in and unlock the door. Armed with the certainty of a break-in, launching a massive sweep to interview every predator living within a 3-mile radius of the Lunsford residence. Out of dozens of names, one specific individual began to stand out with chilling prominence: 46-year-old John Evander Cooey. Cooey was a transient with a disturbing criminal history, specifically including a prior conviction for molesting a child. Even more alarming, when authorities went to check his registered address, they found it abandoned. Through neighborhood canvassing, a detective discovered a horrifying truth. Cooey had actually been living off the radar with his sister in a dilapidated trailer mere steps away from the Lunsford home, a terrifyingly close distance of roughly 150 yards. The realization that a convicted child predator had been secretly living right across the street sent shockwaves through the investigative team. When police descended upon the sister's trailer, they found that Cooey had abruptly fled the area just days after Jessica vanished. This sudden, unannounced departure strongly suggested guilt. The FBI and local authorities immediately launched a frantic multi-state manhunt, releasing Cooey's mugshot to national news outlets and declaring him a primary person of interest. The intense media coverage proved vital. A few weeks into the investigation, a sharp-eyed civilian spotted a man matching Cooey's description wandering near a bus station in Augusta, Georgia, nearly 400 miles away from Homosassa. The tip led to his immediate detention by local police. Florida investigators immediately rushed to Georgia to conduct a face-to-face interrogation with the elusive suspect. Initially, Cooey maintained a cool, nonchalant demeanor, adamantly denying any knowledge of the little girl or her disappearance. Determined to break his facade, investigators requested that he take a polygraph examination. Cooey, perhaps overconfident in his ability to deceive, agreed. The test was administered by seasoned FBI Special Agent Terry Wetmore. For 2 intense hours, Wetmore analyzed Cooey's physiological responses to pointed questions about the night of February 23rd. The results were damning. The turning point of the entire manhunt occurred in the moments following the test. Agent Wetmore later recounted the chilling climax of the interrogation. Special Agent Wetmore, after it was done, I told Mr. Cooey he had failed the test, and that I knew that he had taken Jessica. John Cooey, his composure finally breaking, slumping in defeat. All right, I did it. I took her. Following his confession, John Cooey unraveled a sequence of events so horrifying it defied human comprehension. Under the cover of darkness, fueled by illicit substances, he slipped through the Lunsford family's unlocked door. Startling 9-year-old Jessica awake, he quickly silenced her, forcing the terrified child out of her home and across the street to his squalid trailer to avoid detection. Chillingly, forensic evidence later revealed the true sickening depth of his premeditation. A microscopic speck of dirt found on Jessica's pillow was traced back to the soil outside Cooey's trailer. This seemingly insignificant detail proved that the monster had methodically dug a grave in his backyard before he ever stepped foot inside the little girl's bedroom. For the next 3 days, Jessica endured an unimaginable hell. Cooey locked the little girl inside a cramped, pitch-black closet in his bedroom, subjecting her to repeated torment and starvation. During her agonizing captivity, a devastating twist of fate unfolded, one that would forever haunt the community and law enforcement. Police officers actively canvassing the neighborhood and looking for Cooey regarding his registry violation actually entered the trailer on 2 separate occasions while Jessica was trapped inside. Tragically, performing only a cursory visual check of the rooms, they never opened the closet door. Jessica was left to suffer in the dark, mere inches away from the rescue she so desperately needed. As the massive search operation intensified and police presence swarmed the trailer park, Cooey began to panic. Realizing the net was closing in, he made a sickening decision to dispose of his captive. Playing on the little girl's deepest hopes, he cruelly promised Jessica that he was finally going to take her home to her beloved father. Under this false pretense, he tricked the innocent child into climbing inside 2 heavy black trash bags. Once she was trapped, he tied the bags shut, hoisted her over his shoulder, and carried her out to the shallow 4-foot grave he had prepared days earlier. He callously threw her into the hole and began shoveling dirt over her. When the terrified child began to thrash and struggle against the suffocating weight, the ruthless predator stood on top of the bags, using his own body weight to crush her desperate fight for life, until she stopped moving. Guided by Cooey's confession, 2.5 weeks later, investigators finally unearthed the grave just 150 yards from where Jessica had vanished. The discovery of her remains painted a picture of utter heartbreak and unfathomable terror. Inside the suffocating darkness of the bags, the little girl had fought until her very last breath. Her body was found in a kneeling position, with 2 small fingers having managed to pierce through the thick plastic in a futile attempt to escape. Her hands were bound in front of her, clasped together as if in a silent, final prayer. And there, pressed tightly against her chest in her last moments of life, she was still clutching the purple stuffed dolphin her father had won for her, a devastating symbol of innocence, stolen by unparalleled evil. The trial of John Evander Cooey was a harrowing descent into the nightmare that claimed 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford. Although his defense team attempted to save him from the executioner, the prosecution presented an insurmountable mountain of irrefutable forensic evidence. The most damning piece was a blood stain discovered on the mattress inside Cooey's squalid bedroom. DNA testing conclusively matched the blood to the missing 9-year-old victim. When combined with his desperate flight across state lines to avoid capture, and his own chilling, detailed confession, the physical evidence formed a steel trap that sealed the predator's fate beyond a reasonable doubt. The emotional crescendo of the trial arrived during the prosecution's closing arguments, delivering a shockwave of grief that reverberated throughout the courtroom, seeking to make the jury truly comprehend the sheer horror and depravity of the crime. The lead prosecutor orchestrated a visceral, heartbreaking demonstration, holding a purple stuffed dolphin, a replica of the very toy Jessica had desperately clung to in the dark. He meticulously placed it inside a heavy black trash bag. As he tied the plastic shut in front of the horrified gallery, he described the agonizing minutes of the little girl being buried alive, struggling for air as dirt rained down upon her. The powerful reenactment left the courtroom in stunned silence, bringing several jurors to tears as the unimaginable reality of Jessica's suffocation settled over them. Yet the most powerful and devastating moment belonged to Mark Lunsford. Stepping onto the witness stand, the grieving father directed his piercing gaze straight at the monster who had stolen his world. Channeling the collective outrage and heartbreak of a shattered community, Mark delivered a searing, unforgettable statement that felt like a solemn curse upon the killer. He told Cooey that he hoped the agonizing tears and cries of his daughter would haunt his every waking moment and rob him of sleep for the rest of his miserable life. In his final, resolute plea to the judge, Mark demanded the ultimate punishment, quoting a poignant phrase to underscore the severity of the unspeakable act. "It's just too heavy, Your Honor. It's too heavy for mercy." Cooey was swiftly convicted on all 4 horrific charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, burglary, and aggravated, and was subsequently sentenced to death. However, the predator would never make it to the execution chamber. In September 2009, just 2 years after his conviction, the child killer succumbed to a painful battle with cancer, dying unceremoniously inside his prison cell. For Mark Lunsford, who had endured the ultimate loss, this slow, agonizing end behind bars was not an evasion of justice. Instead, he saw it as the universe balancing the scales of fitting miserable demise that the grieving father simply described as absolute karma. In the devastating aftermath of his daughter's brutal murder, Mark Lunsford found himself staring into a seemingly bottomless abyss of grief. However, rather than allowing the crushing weight of despair to consume him, the heartbroken father made a profound decision to channel his unbearable pain into a relentless crusade for justice. Recognizing that the systemic legal failures which allowed a monster like John Cooey to slip through the cracks could easily claim another innocent life, Mark sacrificed everything to ensure no other family would have to endure his waking nightmare. He abruptly quit his steady job, walking away from his normal life to dedicate his entire existence to becoming a full-time child safety activist. Embracing his passion for motorcycles, Mark took to the open highways to spread his urgent message. Clad in a leather biker jacket vividly embroidered with the smiling face of his beloved 9-year-old daughter across the back, he traveled the country tirelessly. With Jesse symbolically riding alongside him, Mark transformed from a grieving single father into a fierce, unwavering guardian for children everywhere, lobbying lawmakers and rallying communities with raw, unfiltered emotion. His passionate advocacy quickly caught the attention of politicians and the public alike, culminating in the historic creation of the Jessica Lunsford Act, commonly known as Jessica's Law. Initially drafted and passed with overwhelming support in the state of Florida, this landmark piece of legislation was specifically designed to aggressively tighten the legal leash on convicted child predators. Mark had been infuriated to learn that Cooey, a repeat offender, had been living unchecked right across the street from his family. To prevent this dangerous oversight from ever happening again, Jessica's Law mandated incredibly strict monitoring protocols. It required convicted offenders who prey on children to wear electronic GPS tracking devices for life, ensuring law enforcement always knew their exact whereabouts. Furthermore, the legislation drastically increased mandatory minimum prison sentences for child predators, stripping lenient judges of the ability to let dangerous offenders back on the streets prematurely, and enforced rigorous community alert systems to keep neighborhoods informed. One of the most critical and impactful provisions of Jessica's Law addressed a terrifying revelation uncovered during the investigation. John Cooey had previously been employed by a contractor that did part-time work at the very elementary school Jessica attended. The horrifying realization that a convicted child molester had been granted physical proximity to hundreds of vulnerable students sent shockwaves through the educational system. Consequently, the new law implemented uncompromising, stringent background checks. It mandated that any individual, whether a direct employee, a vendor, or an outside contractor who sought work on school grounds, must undergo a rigorous screening and fingerprinting process. This crucial barrier ensured that predators could no longer hide behind third-party employment to gain access to school campuses. The ripple effect of Mark Lunsford's grueling, passionate crusade extended far beyond the borders of Florida. Driven by a father's undying love and an absolute refusal to back down in the face of bureaucratic resistance, Mark traveled from state to state, standing before legislatures to plead his case. His tireless, unwavering fight resonated deeply across the nation, sparking a massive legislative movement. Today, driven by the memory of a little girl who loved the color purple and her stuffed animals, an astounding 46 states across the United States have adopted their own versions or similar rigorous provisions of Jessica's Law. Through his extraordinary resilience, Mark successfully transformed his ultimate tragedy into a monumental legal shield, cementing a legacy that continues to protect millions of children. As the calendar turned to February 2025, marking the solemn 20-year anniversary of Jessica Lunsford's tragic death, a profound shift occurred in how her story was told. For 2 decades, the narrative had been intrinsically linked to the gruesome, heartbreaking details of a horrific crime that shook the nation to its core. However, on this significant milestone, the media, the community, and her family made a conscious decision to change the conversation. Instead of dwelling on the darkness of the monster who stole her away, the focus turned toward the brilliant, endearing legacy she left behind. For Mark Lunsford, who had spent the last 20 years fighting relentlessly in his daughter's name, this anniversary was not just a day of mourning, but a celebration of monumental change. The tragedy had birthed a powerful movement, proving that even in the face of unimaginable evil, profound good can emerge and flourish. Beyond the sweeping legislative victories of Jessica's Law, her legacy materialized in highly tangible, deeply compassionate ways, most notably through the creation of Jesse's Place. Before this groundbreaking initiative, children who had survived unspeakable cruelty were subjected to a traumatizing, bureaucratic nightmare. They were often dragged from the intimidating clinical environment of police station interrogation rooms to cold hospital wards for physical examinations, and then shuttled off to separate facilities for psychological therapy. This fragmented process forced traumatized victims to recount their horrors repeatedly in uncomfortable settings. Jesse's Place revolutionized this agonizing ordeal by establishing a centralized one-stop children's advocacy center. Designed specifically as a comforting, child-friendly safe haven, the center consolidates law enforcement investigators, medical professionals, and specialized trauma therapists under one welcoming roof. Here, traumatized children can find solace, receive comprehensive care, and begin their fragile journey toward healing without being subjected to further systemic trauma. It stands as a living tribute to Jessica's gentle spirit, ensuring that the most vulnerable are treated with the utmost dignity and compassion. The profound impact of Jessica's life also echoes through the very halls of the institution sworn to protect the public. Inside the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, a beautiful and poignant memorial known as the Tree of Life proudly adorns the wall. Each leaf on this magnificent tree represents the collaborative efforts of various agencies and volunteers who rallied together during the darkest hours of the investigation. More importantly, the memorial serves as a permanent visual anchor for the law enforcement officers who walk past it every single day. It acts as a solemn daily reminder of exactly why they wear the badge, why strict child protection safeguards must be fiercely upheld, and what is truly at stake. The Tree of Life ensures that the innocents lost will never be forgotten, transforming a symbol of grief into a perpetual beacon of duty and vigilance. Although Jessica Lunsford's earthly life was brutally cut short at just 9 years old, her radiant spirit defied the grave. She has transcended her tragic fate to become a guardian angel for millions of children across the United States. Through the laws enacted and the safe havens built in her name, she continues to shield the innocent from the shadows. For Mark Lunsford, the agonizing journey from a desperate, grieving father to a nationwide hero has ultimately brought him to a place of quiet peace. He no longer carries the suffocating weight of anger. Instead, he carries the enduring warmth of his daughter's love. In moments of quiet reflection, Mark finds comfort in talking aloud to himself, knowing that the comforting voice echoing back in his heart is the spirit of his sweet Jessie forever present, forever guiding him, and walking beside him for the rest of his days.
Police announced tonight they arrested a juvenile in connection to her death.
Her body was found yesterday morning off a walking trail in Chippewa Falls. Today, her aunt's home, where she was last seen, was searched and blocked off with police tape. It's just half a mile from where her body was found.
Years back or change what happened. We are very grateful to be able to deliver this news for the family and for the community.
The chief indicated a boy younger than 18 was in custody, saying Lily knew him.
We do not believe there is any danger to the community at this time.
Since this like this happens, we become strong and we're going to grow as a community.
A quiet April evening in Chippewa Falls suddenly turned into a living nightmare when a 10-year-old girl vanished just blocks away from her home. But the most horrifying part wasn't her disappearance, it was the blood-chilling truth behind it. The predator wasn't some stranger lurking in the shadows, it was her own 14-year-old cousin. He meticulously planned the attack, lured her to her death, committed unimaginably brutal acts, and then calmly went home to wash his blood-stained clothes, as if nothing had happened. What unfolded next was not just a hunt for justice, but the exposure of a twisted family harboring the most sinister secrets. Your blood will boil when you realize what it took for the law to finally face this monster.
Can you show me how you...
Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, is the kind of picturesque, tight-knit community where everyone knows their neighbors. It's a place of quiet streets, local heritage, and peaceful walking trails. Living right in the heart of this idyllic town was 10-year-old Ileana Lily Peters. Lily was a bright, radiant fourth grader with an infectious smile that could light up any room. She loved being outdoors, hanging out with her friends, and most of all, riding her beloved bicycle around her neighborhood. Sunday, April 24, 2022 started out like any other lazy spring weekend. At around 3 p.m., Lily hopped on her bike to visit her aunt's house. It wasn't a journey into the unknown, her aunt lived a mere 4 blocks away. It was a route Lily had taken countless times, a simple, safe 5-minute ride that no one ever thought twice about. But as the afternoon hours melted into the evening and the sun began to dip below the horizon, a creeping sense of dread settled over Lily's father. She hadn't come home. When he frantically called his sister to check on Lily, his heart stopped at her response. Lily had left the house over an hour ago. She should have been home by now. Panic immediately ensued. He called her friends, scoured the neighborhood, and frantically retraced her route, but Lily was nowhere to be found. By 9 p.m., suffocated by terror, her father made the agonizing call to the police to report his little girl missing. What struck me the most was how a 5-minute bike ride could turn into a parent's worst nightmare. Desperate to find her, Lily's father pleaded with authorities to issue an Amber Alert. Every single second mattered. But in a twist that left the family and the public absolutely furious, the police refused. According to official protocol, Lily's disappearance did not meet the strict criteria required to trigger the alert system. There was no confirmed abduction, no specific suspect, and no vehicle description. This rigid bureaucracy sparked an instant firestorm of outrage across the community. How could a 10-year-old girl vanish into the dark without the highest alarm being sounded? Despite the lack of an Amber Alert, the town refused to sleep. A frantic search through the dark streets began as hundreds of volunteers, K-9 units and officers scoured the area. Flashlights pierced through the frigid night, sweeping across the dense, isolating woods bordering the local walking trails. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, the chilling reality of the situation echoed through the police dispatch radios, a moment captured in the official records.
City MS can respond to the Liney's parking lot reference the missing child. You can respond to the Liney's parking lot close to that pig alley. There'll be somebody waiting for you. Law enforcement's en route.
Little did they know, the nightmare was only just beginning. As the clock ticked past midnight, the frantic search for 10-year-old Lily Peters escalated into a desperate race against time. The usually quiet town of Chippewa Falls was completely transformed. Hundreds of exhausted but determined volunteers, local law enforcement, and specialized K-9 units descended upon the dense, sprawling woods surrounding the local walking trail. Drones buzzed continuously overhead, their thermal cameras trying to pierce through the pitch-black canopy, while a sea of flashlights frantically swept across the unforgiving, rugged terrain. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig sent a jolt of desperate hope through the searchers. But as the agonizing hours dragged on, that hope slowly mutated into a suffocating, icy dread. The first devastating clue emerged in the early hours of the morning when searchers stumbled upon Lily's beloved bicycle. It wasn't just casually abandoned on the side of the trail or accidentally dropped. It had been deliberately and carefully hidden deep within the brush. This wasn't the scene of a child who had simply wandered off or gotten lost in the dark. This was the terrifying, undeniable signature of a predator trying to cover their tracks. The moment that bike was discovered, the atmosphere in the woods shifted entirely. The collective heart of the community sank. When the sun finally broke through the trees on Monday morning, it didn't bring warmth or comfort. It brought a horrifying, world-shattering reality. At approximately 9:15 a.m., the massive search effort came to a devastating, heartbreaking halt. Just yards away from the walking trail, intentionally concealed under a thick, heavy pile of dirt, broken branches, and dry leaves, searchers found the lifeless body of sweet, innocent Lily. The cries of pure anguish that echoed through those woods that morning are the kind that will haunt the town of Chippewa Falls forever. She had been brutally taken from this world, just minutes away from the safety of her own home. This is where the story takes a dark turn into pure, unimaginable evil. The details from the autopsy report unveiled a level of violence that left even the most seasoned, hardened investigators completely sick to their stomachs. Lily didn't just pass away, she was subjected to absolute, unimaginable terror. The medical examiner discovered 3 severe blunt force trauma wounds to the left side of her head, brutally inflicted by a heavy stick. But the horror didn't stop there. There were distinct, undeniable signs of brutal manual strangulation. The perpetrator had choked the life out of this terrified little girl with their bare hands. And then, in an act of profound, sickening depravity, the monster sexually assaulted her body. The sheer brutality of this calculated attack was later laid bare in the courtroom, leaving the entire gallery in stunned silence. District Attorney Wade Newell stood before the judge and delivered a statement that chilled everyone to the very bone.
When he did get off of the trail, punched the victim in the stomach, knocked her to the ground, essentially strangled her, hit her with a stick before strangling her to the point of death before he then sexually assaulted.
Hearing those exact words, realizing the sheer agony and profound fear this 10-year-old girl went through in her final moments is completely devastating. Does this make your blood boil too? The entire town was paralyzed with fear, locking their doors and holding their children tight, terrified that a deranged drifter was hunting in their quiet streets. But law enforcement's focus abruptly shifted away from the dark alleys and landed right on the family's own doorstep. On the evening of April 26th, police cruisers swarmed the house at 422 North Grove Street, the home of Lily's aunt, and the exact place the 10-year-old was last seen alive. Officers executed a search warrant, carrying critical bags of evidence out into the night. Shortly after, authorities stood before the press and delivered an announcement that completely shattered the community. An arrest had been made. The predator wasn't a faceless stranger lurking in the shadows. The monster was the victim's own blood. They arrested Lily's 14-year-old cousin, Carson Peters Berger. It is almost impossible to comprehend how a simple family visit could end in such a horrific betrayal. If you appreciate the work we do to uncover the truth and seek justice for innocent victims like Lily, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support truly helps the channel keep shedding light on these devastating cases. The horrifying truth is that investigators didn't have to chase this killer across state lines. The vital clue came from inside the family. According to official reports, the breakthrough happened when Carson's own grandmother contacted authorities. In a deeply disturbing twist, after committing the unspeakable crime, Carson allegedly returned home and casually confessed to his younger sister. Relatives noted that he spoke about the murder with an eerie, chilling smile. Terrified by what she heard, the young sister confided in her grandmother, who instantly realized the predator the town was hunting was sleeping under her own roof. When investigators brought the 14-year-old in for questioning, they likely expected tears, denial, or at least a shred of remorse. Instead, they were met with a terrifyingly calm and calculated demeanor. Carson recounted the events of that fateful Sunday with disturbing ease. He admitted that he had escorted Lily from the house. While she pedaled her bike, he rolled alongside her on his hoverboard. As they approached the familiar walking trail, he suggested a detour. He deliberately lured his innocent younger cousin off the safe path and deep into the dense, isolating woods under the guise of exploring a shortcut. He didn't just snap. This wasn't a tragic accident born out of a sudden, heated argument. During the interrogation, the chilling reality of his dark mind was laid completely bare in the official records. "Detective, when did you plan to do this?" "Carson, I intended to rape and kill her from the moment we left the house. I gotta be honest with you." Hearing a 14-year-old admit to premeditated murder with such ease is bone-chilling. He had consciously mapped out the brutal demise of his own blood relative before they even stepped off the front porch. The level of sociopathic detachment required to look your sweet, trusting 10-year-old cousin in the eye, knowing exactly what you are about to do to her, defies all human logic. He watched her smile, watched her push her bike, all while a sinister countdown ticked away in his mind. What kind of darkness has to reside inside a young teenager to execute such a ruthless, cold-blooded plan? No one could have predicted what happened next. After committing acts of unimaginable violence against his 10-year-old cousin, 14-year-old Carson Peters Berger didn't break down in tears, panic, or call for help. Instead, he simply walked away from the horrors he had just inflicted, leaving sweet Lily's broken body behind in the dirt. According to the official criminal complaint, he casually headed back to his house, stepped inside as if it were just another ordinary Sunday evening, and took a shower. He carefully gathered up his dirty, evidence-laden clothes and threw them into the laundry, systematically washing away the physical traces of his brutal crime. He seamlessly blended right back into the household routine, acting completely normal while the rest of the family slowly began to realize that Lily was missing. But the nightmare was only just beginning. As the sun set and the agonizing terror set in, the frantic search commenced. Sirens wailed in the distance, and the desperate voices of terrified relatives and neighbors echoed through the dark woods. Hearing the commotion and realizing people were actively out looking for the little girl, Carson didn't step forward to end his family's excruciating torment. He didn't confess. Instead, a twisted sense of self-preservation kicked in. Under the cover of darkness, this 14-year-old boy snuck back out to the crime scene. He approached the lifeless body of the cousin he had just brutalized, dragged her a few feet further into the dense brush, and deliberately piled heavy leaves, dirt, and branches over her to ensure she wouldn't be found. The level of cold, calculating detachment required to return to the scene and conceal your own family member is absolutely staggering. Then comes the detail that will truly make you sick to your stomach. The following evening, after Lily's body was finally discovered and the town was engulfed in profound grief, the Chippewa Falls community held a vigil to mourn the tragic loss of the bright, radiant fourth grader. And who was standing right there in the crowd? Carson. Witnesses reported seeing the teenager at the memorial, boldly inserting himself directly into the epicenter of the tragedy. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the very people whose lives he had just violently destroyed. He was seen offering condolences and physically hugging Lily's devastated family members, comforting them for a nightmare that he himself had orchestrated. I couldn't stop thinking about how anyone, let alone a young teenager, could compartmentalize such sheer, sinister evil. To look into the tear-filled eyes of a grieving relative, wrap your arms around them, and offer comfort while knowing you are the monster who stole their little girl's life requires a level of psychopathy that is terrifying to even comprehend. He wore the mask of a grieving cousin flawlessly, hiding the blood on his hands right in plain sight. What do you guys make of this kind of cold-blooded behavior? But what no one knew was that monsters are rarely born, they are meticulously forged in the darkest of environments. To truly understand the sheer brutality of this 14-year-old's actions, investigators had to peel back the rotting layers of his family tree. This is where the story takes a dark turn into the origins of a killer. Carson Peters Berger did not grow up in a safe, nurturing home. His biological father, Adam Berger, was a convicted predator. In 2018, Adam was sentenced to 3 years in prison after authorities caught him in a massive sting operation, finding him in possession of highly illegal explicit images of underage, prepubescent girls. He even disturbingly superimposed his own face onto some of the horrifying photos. Knowing that the man who helped bring Carson into the world was a documented threat to children casts a sickening, irredeemable shadow over the entire tragedy. However, the toxic influence didn't stop at the prison gates. The boy's mother had her own troubled history, carrying a rap sheet that included substance abuse and battery charges. The household was a chaotic, unstable environment, further poisoned by the presence of her boyfriend, John Repetto. A quick look into Repetto's publicly accessible Facebook page revealed a terrifyingly twisted mindset that was allowed to fester right in front of a developing teenager. Repetto consistently posted deeply disturbing memes that glorified infamous serial killers like Ed Gein. His feed was a horrifying gallery of inappropriate, violent jokes and sickening posts making light of abuse. This was the decaying ecosystem Carson was submerged in every single day, surrounded by a legacy of drug use, predatory behavior, and a complete absence of a moral compass. This household was the perfect, terrifying incubator to mold a troubled adolescent into a cold-blooded monster. The nightmare was only just beginning to unravel as digital clues pointed to a sinister game of cat and mouse. Before Lily's body was even pulled from the brush, a chilling breadcrumb was dropped on the internet. A Reddit user operating under the moniker HomesliceNation4 suddenly posted on a thread discussing Lily's disappearance. The anonymous user claimed they had been playing Pokémon Go in the park that exact day, walking along the very same isolated trail. The post eerily described seeing a little girl in a pink and purple hoodie riding her bike with a slightly older kid, before adding a terrifyingly accurate prediction. I have suspicion that it could be another kid that did it. It was a detail so specific, so perfectly aligned with the horrific truth, that it immediately sent shivers down the spines of everyone following the case. Shortly after dropping that damning clue, the Reddit account vanished into thin air, completely scrubbed from the platform. But the internet leaves a trail, and disturbing rumors soon surfaced that years prior, this exact same user had allegedly posted a chilling, prophetic, "I'll kill my cousins before anyone else gets a chance." This part really makes my blood boil when you realize that this 10-year-old's brutal murder wasn't just a random act of violence, but the horrific climax of years of unchecked, generational depravity. Does it make you furious to think that this toxic family dynamic essentially handed a loaded psychological weapon to a 14-year-old boy? The legal battle over Carson Peters Berger was a high-stakes war between the pursuit of accountability and a defense team desperate to keep a cold-blooded killer out of prison. In the state of Wisconsin, the law is rigid. Any child 10 years or older accused of first-degree intentional homicide must automatically begin their legal journey in adult court. This was the battlefield where Carson's attorneys launched a reverse waiver petition, a frantic legal maneuver to move the case down to the juvenile system. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If they succeeded, a convicted murderer might be released as early as age 21. If they failed, he faced multiple life sentences behind the cold steel bars of a state prison. During the intense, multi-day hearings, the defense brought in a series of psychological experts to argue that Carson was not a predator, but a child with a shattered, undeveloped mind. They diagnosed him with autism spectrum disorder (ASD), persistent depressive disorder, and severe anxiety. One doctor testified that Carson's emotional maturity was that of a child only 4 to 6 years old, and his social functioning was no better than a kindergartner. They claimed his addiction to pornography, exacerbated by his autism, had triggered a temporary adolescent crisis that led to the violence. They argued that the adult prison system was far too harsh and lacked the intensive, one-on-one therapy Carson supposedly needed to be rehabilitated. I gotta be honest with you, hearing these arguments makes my blood boil. It felt like they were asking the world to ignore the cold, calculated planning that went into Lily's death, just because the killer allegedly had the emotional capacity of a toddler. I couldn't stop thinking about how the defense tried to weaponize a medical diagnosis to excuse such a sinister act. But the prosecution stood their ground. They pointed to the chilling evidence: the hoverboard, the stick, the deliberate luring into the woods, and the systematic, multi-step cover-up of the body. These were not the impulsive, confused mistakes of a kindergartner. They were the actions of a lucid killer who knew exactly how to hide a crime and then comfort a grieving family afterward. For 2 long years, the case hung in a tense legal limbo, leaving Lily's family in an agonizing state of uncertainty. But in September 2024, the Wisconsin Court of Appeals finally broke the silence. In a landmark decision, the 3-judge panel upheld the lower court's ruling, officially keeping the trial in adult court. The court found that the trial judge had used a rational process to determine that the sheer brutality of the crime outweighed Carson's alleged mental impairments. For Lily's community, it was a moment of profound, albeit painful relief. The monster who stole their little girl would QBCNG have to face the full weight of adult justice. As the courtroom drama unfolded, a parallel battle was being fought in the court of public opinion. Lily's father had been denied an Amber Alert on the night she vanished. Because the case didn't meet strict federal criteria, there was no vehicle description and no confirmed abduction at the hour he called. This failure sparked a massive outcry, leading to a petition signed by over 130,000 people to create the Lily Alert. This proposed statewide system would allow police to bypass the rigid federal rules and issue an immediate alert whenever a child goes missing under suspicious circumstances. Does this make your blood boil too? Why should a child's life depend on whether or not a witness saw a specific car? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The push for the Lily Alert stands as a symbol of the community's refusal to let Lily's death be in vain. It was a rally for every child in Wisconsin, a promise that next time, the system would not wait while a predator was on the move. With the 2024 ruling and a trial date now set for November 2, 2026, the wheels of justice are turning slowly, but they are turning. The legal chess match is almost over, and the final move will determine the ultimate accountability for the monster in the family. More than 4 years have passed since that horrific April night changed Chippewa Falls forever, yet the wounds of this small town remain wide open. The streets where Lily once rode her bike now carry a different atmosphere, more cautious, more somber. But finally, after a series of dark twists and the defense's desperate attempts to cling to any loophole, the light of justice has begun to pierce through the black clouds hanging over the Peters family. The ending we have all been waiting for has finally come to light. With the Wisconsin Court of Appeals officially rejecting every argument regarding autism spectrum disorder or a low mental age, Carson Peters Berger now has nowhere left to run. This monster will have to face the grimmest reality, being tried as an adult murderer, facing charges of first-degree intentional homicide and sexual assault of a child. Carson is looking at a life sentence without the possibility of freedom. This is not just a legal verdict. It is a salvation for Lily's soul and for a community deeply scarred by a betrayal from within their own home. If you feel a sense of relief knowing that this predator will pay dearly for his actions, please take a second to subscribe to the channel right now. Your support is the strength that allows me to continue bringing the darkest truths to light and demanding justice for victims like Lily. The final day of judgment has been set for November 2, 2026. Although the wait may feel agonizingly long, it is a necessary silence to ensure that every piece of evidence is laid bare and not a single loophole remains for the killer to escape the law's punishment. While Carson must count each day in the isolation of detention, outside, Chippewa Falls has chosen to remember Lily in the most beautiful way. Throughout the town, purple, Lily's favorite color, has become a symbol of hope and resilience. Purple benches have been solemnly placed in the park where she used to play, near the church and her old elementary school. They sit there, quiet under the sun, as an affirmation that Lily will forever be 10 years old, forever radiant, and forever the angel protected by the entire town. Those benches are places for people to sit, to remember Lily's smile, and to remind one another that while darkness may lurk, light will always prevail. Finally, justice is on the horizon, and we can only hope this brings some sense of relief to Lily's family. Looking back at this entire journey, from the moment the bicycle was left behind in the woods to the unwavering verdict of the court, we see the devastating power of evil, but we also see the unyielding resilience of justice. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? Is a life sentence enough to make up for what Lily had to endure? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to know how you feel after following this haunting journey to the end. I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching and for all the comments you guys make this worth it. Stay safe, look after your loved ones, and I'll see you in the next case.
Morning, and prosecutors shared new video in court revealing what a North Texas 7-year-old's final moments of life were like. A stranger, Tanner Horner, took her from her home, forced her to undress, and then strangled her.
Step back, keep your hands up. Step back, turn around, make away from me.
So that being said, as bits and pieces are coming back, that's one thing that you're sure on as well, especially assault. And obviously you need to see details of the way that it is.
Starting heading towards that, I guess, it's a county road, the one right across from 2123, and that's when I threw her in the bush.
The chilling audio captured inside a FedEx delivery van reveals a terrifying reality no parent should ever fathom. A 7-year-old girl, snatched from her own front yard just weeks before Christmas, pleads for her life in the dark. As she cries out, asking if he is a kidnapper, the 250-pound driver simply warns her not to scream, masking her final moments with the upbeat tune of Jingle Bell Rock. Her name was Athena Strand. She thought she was just receiving a package of Barbie dolls. Instead, she opened the door to a ruthless monster. The nightmare was only just beginning. Paradise, Texas is exactly what it sounds like, a quiet, sprawling rural community where families live on acres of open land and kids can just be kids. It's the kind of place where danger feels like something that only happens on the evening news, far away from their tight-knit neighborhoods. This was the safe, idyllic world of 7-year-old Athena Strand. Athena was an absolute light in the lives of everyone who knew her. She was a vibrant, free spirit who adored the color pink, sang Frozen songs at the top of her lungs, and had this fierce, beautiful dream of growing up to be a Viking princess, with tattoos like her dad and hair as long as Rapunzel's. She was an innocent, joyful child full of life and boundless imagination. On the chilly afternoon of November 30, 2022, the sun was beginning to dip below the Texas horizon. It was a completely ordinary Wednesday. Athena was at home on her father's expansive property, just steps away from the safety of her front door. Sometime around dusk, a familiar white FedEx delivery truck rumbled up the long dirt driveway. To a kid, a delivery driver is practically a modern-day Santa Claus. When that truck pulls up, it usually means something exciting has arrived. And something had. The driver dropped off a package on the property. Inside that cardboard box was a "You Can Be Anything" Barbie collection. It was an early Christmas present meant to be placed under the tree for Athena, a gift perfectly suited for a little girl whose entire future was ahead of her. But just minutes after that package was set on the ground, Athena vanished without a trace. When it was time for dinner, she was simply gone. The sprawling property that had always been her safe playground suddenly felt vast, empty, and terrifyingly silent. Panic immediately set in as her family frantically searched every corner, calling out her name into the frigid night air. What struck me the most was that while her family was desperately tearing through the brush, praying she had just wandered off, the horrifying truth was unfolding just down the road, trapped in complete darkness. Inside the cold, metallic cargo area of that FedEx van, a terrified 7-year-old girl was looking up at a massive, 250-pound man. The truck's internal camera had been deliberately covered, but the system's microphone kept running. Through the chilling audio, you can hear the raw, unimaginable fear in Athena's voice. With heartbreaking innocence, she asks a question no child should ever have to ask.
Warns her, "Don't scream or I will hurt you."
She keeps asking him, "Where are we going?" Finally, she says, "Are you a kidnapper?"
Athena begins to cry when Horner asks her to take off her shirt and tells him, "My mom says you can't do that to me." Athena tells him to stop and says, No, I want my mama, I want my mama." The recording is more than an hour long, with Athena crying, gasping for air, and in pain.
You can actually hear what we think might be the point where he began to strangle her.
Her family was still back at the house, searching the dense woods and praying for her safe return. Little did they know, the monster wasn't lurking in the woods. He was driving a delivery truck right out of their driveway. The sun quickly vanished, taking with it any remaining warmth as the Texas night turned bone-chillingly cold. Back at the property, what started as a frantic sweep of the house and yard had spiraled into pure, unadulterated panic. Athena's father, Jacob, and her stepmother, Ashley, realized she wasn't just hiding, she was completely gone. The sprawling acres that usually felt like a childhood sanctuary now felt like a vast, terrifying void. law enforcement descended on the quiet town of Paradise. An Amber Alert blared across phones statewide, officially turning a missing child report into a desperate race against time. The darkness was soon pierced by the blinding beams of police flashlights and the steady, thumping rhythm of helicopters circling overhead. Hundreds of local officers, Texas Rangers, and the FBI flooded the area. K-9 units aggressively sniffed the frigid ground, trying to pick up any trace of the little girl. But the woods remained agonizingly silent. Miles away in Oklahoma, Athena's biological mother, Maitland, received the phone call that is every parent's absolute worst nightmare. Driven by pure adrenaline and a sickening, gut-wrenching intuition that something was horribly wrong, she jumped into her car. She drove at breakneck speeds across state lines, pushing her vehicle to the absolute limit. Every passing mile was pure agony, her mind racing with terrifying scenarios, desperately holding onto the fragile hope that her baby girl would be found safe before she got there. I gotta be honest with you guys, the sheer terror her parents must have felt staring out into those dark woods. I can't even imagine. How would you feel if this happened to someone you love? It's a level of helplessness that genuinely makes my heart ache. While the family prayed for a miracle, investigators were working frantically behind the scenes. They quickly honed in on the one anomaly at the property that evening the FedEx delivery. The chase was on. Law enforcement tracked down the driver, 31-year-old Tanner Horner, bringing him in for questioning. When officers finally confronted him, the exchange was captured on police body cam footage. The atmosphere was tense, the officers desperate for answers to bring the little girl home. It was a devastating admission that shattered all hope in an instant. But the horrifying truth was, his statement was a blatant, calculated lie. Athena had been alive when he threw her into the back of that dark van. No one could have predicted what happened next. And the chase to uncover exactly what he did to her was just beginning. As the frantic, boots-on-the-ground search consumed the local community, the Wise County Sheriff's Office and the Texas Rangers were working a different angle behind the scenes. They began piecing together a crucial timeline, and it didn't take long for a devastating connection to emerge. They realized the exact window of time Athena vanished matched perfectly with the delivery of that Barbie doll Christmas package. It wasn't a random disappearance or a tragic wandering off. The threat had been brought right to their doorstep. Investigators immediately coordinated with the delivery company to access the truck's third-party internal monitoring system, a highly advanced software known as Velocitor. This system was designed to track GPS breadcrumbs in real time, but more importantly, it continuously recorded video and audio from inside the vehicle. The digital footprint quickly unmasked the suspect, a 31-year-old contract delivery driver named Tanner Horner. When FBI digital forensic analysts finally extracted the data from the truck's SD card, they were met with a calculated, sinister reality. Horner wasn't just a panicked driver who made a sudden mistake. He knew exactly what he was doing and knew he was being watched. In a deliberate and chilling move, he had placed an object over the interior camera lens right before the nightmare escalated. He plunged the visual feed into absolute darkness, likely believing he had successfully erased any visual proof of his twisted actions. But he made a fatal, undeniable mistake. While the lens was blinded, the system's microphone kept running. It silently captured an entire hour of the horrific crime. For 60 agonizing minutes, the microphone recorded a blood-chilling nightmare unfolding inside the metal walls of the cargo area. The audio captured the terrifying sounds of a 250-pound man unleashing unimaginable violence on a tiny, helpless 7-year-old girl. Amidst the terrifying chaos, the muffled banging against the truck doors and the frantic cries for help, Athena fought back with the spirit of an absolute warrior. In one utterly devastating moment, through her desperate screams and heavy sobs, she tried to reason with the cold-blooded monster towering over her. With heartbreaking innocence, she cried out, "My mom told me I couldn't do this to anyone else, you can't do this to me." Just let that sink in for a second. Even in the face of pure, unadulterated evil, this sweet little girl was leaning on her mother's lessons about kindness and right from wrong. It is a detail that just completely shatters your soul. Before we go further into this dark timeline, if you value these deep dives and want to help us keep shining a light on victims who had their voices brutally stolen, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep demanding justice for angels like Athena. law enforcement officers, veterans who had seen the absolute worst of humanity had to sit in a quiet room and listen to that innocent child beg for her life while her attacker ignored every single plea. The horrifying truth is, what the audio recorded next is something that would break the hardest of investigators. The horrifying timeline, reconstructed through his chilling confessions and grim forensic evidence, revealed exactly what happened inside that mobile crime scene. Horner initially tried to spin a narrative to investigators, claiming that as he was navigating the driveway, he accidentally backed his massive delivery truck into little Athena. According to his own cold admission, the impact wasn't severe. She wasn't seriously injured, she was alive, alert, and simply scared. Any normal human being would have scooped her up, rushed to her parents' door, and called for help. But Horner didn't. Instead, his mind shifted to pure, twisted self-preservation. He later confessed to detectives that he panicked over a trivial fear. He was terrified he would get in trouble and lose his job if she told her father. To save his paycheck, he made the sinister decision to grab the innocent child and throw her into the pitch-black cargo hold of his van. Once inside, the situation rapidly devolved from a kidnapping into an unimaginable nightmare. The audio captured him ordering the terrified 7-year-old to take off her shirt. Athena, embodying the spirit of an absolute warrior, fiercely resisted. She fought back against a man nearly 4 times her size, refusing to comply. Frustrated by her fight, Horner's violence escalated to a sickening extreme. He coldly confessed that he first tried to violently snap her neck, hoping to end her life quickly so she wouldn't be able to tell on him. When that failed and she continued to struggle, he pinned her down and ruthlessly strangled the life out of her with his bare hands. But what struck me the most, the detail that will forever haunt everyone who sat in that courtroom, was the background noise of this brutal execution. While Athena was fighting for her final breaths, the truck's radio was playing the cheerful, upbeat holiday tune of Jingle Bell Rock. And Horner, he was casually singing along to the festive music as he tortured and murdered a child. I gotta be honest with you guys, this part really makes my blood boil when you realize the absolute void of human empathy inside this man. Does this make your blood boil too? After snuffing out her vibrant life, Horner drove to a remote, desolate stretch near Bobo Crossing. He callously dumped Athena's naked, bruised body into the frigid waters of the Trinity River, discarding her as if her precious life meant absolutely nothing.
After Horner disposed of Athena's body, he stops to clean up the van. Then he is back on camera, smoking a cigarette, making phone calls like nothing happened. And the next day, drives back to Athena's neighborhood, where people are searching for her.
No, that's the only way out. I have more packages to deliver.
Prosecutors say this video shows how uncaring Horner is while going on with his life. And for this jury, it may be the evidence that sends him to death row.
The sheer audacity of his cold-blooded detachment didn't stop there. The very next day, while the entire town of Paradise was engulfed in a frantic, tear-filled search while helicopters scarred the woods and her parents wept in pure agony, Horner simply clocked back into work. He drove that exact same delivery truck right through Athena's neighborhood, casually dropping off packages and watching the heartbreaking chaos he had orchestrated, completely unfazed. No one could have predicted what happened next as investigators finally closed in on the devil himself. Diving into the twisted, sinister psychology of Tanner Horner reveals a deeply manipulative predator who was desperate to cast himself as the victim of circumstance. Once the walls closed in and the physical evidence became undeniable, he didn't show a single ounce of genuine remorse for the brutal nightmare he inflicted on a helpless child. Instead, he began spinning a chaotic web of bizarre, calculated lies to save his own skin. He had the absolute audacity to blame His Highness' actions on his Asperger's syndrome, claiming that unannounced changes to his FedEx delivery schedule caused his mental health to deteriorate into an uncontrollable state. But the deception didn't stop there. In a truly pathetic, blood-chilling attempt to escape accountability, Horner fabricated a sinister alter ego he called Zero. He looked seasoned investigators dead in the eye and claimed that he wasn't the one who committed the murder, it was Zero who took over his body and forced his hands. When that ridiculous facade failed to hold up, he pivoted again, writing a desperate letter from his jail cell. This time, he spun a wild, fabricated tale about an older, unidentified man who allegedly held him at gunpoint in the driveway and forced him to kidnap the little girl. But this is where the story takes a dark turn for his defense. The courtroom saw right through his sickening smoke and mirrors. During the trial, expert psychologist Dr. Amy Fritz took the stand and completely dismantled Horner's fragile narrative of a mental health crisis. She painstakingly reviewed the horrific video footage and pointed out the glaring, undeniable truth. Horner exhibited absolutely none of the physical signs associated with an autism meltdown. There was no head banging, no flushing of the face, and zero emotional dysregulation. What Dr. Fritz and the investigators saw wasn't a man lost in the throes of a psychotic break. They saw cold, calculated, and terrifyingly calm premeditation. His actions were deliberate every step of the way. He had the sinister presence of mind to intentionally cover the truck's internal camera before the violence escalated. Right after snuffing out a child's life, his demeanor didn't shatter into panic. Instead, his language was steady. He calmly picked up his phone, dialed his boss, and flawlessly lied about throwing up at a truck stop so he could abandon his route. Surveillance footage even captured him nonchalantly cleaning the back of his van and smoking a cigarette, acting as if he had just finished a mundane afternoon chore rather than a brutal murder. The absolute pinnacle of his chilling selfishness was caught on tape during his police interrogations. While sitting in a holding cell, knowing full well that a sweet 7-year-old girl was lying dead in a freezing river because of his bare hands, Horner broke down and began to sob. But the tears rolling down his face weren't for Athena. He wasn't crying for the devastated parents whose lives he had just destroyed. He was weeping entirely for himself, whining to investigators that he was going to miss out on his own son's life and crying over the fact that he wouldn't get to spend Christmas with his child. This part really makes my blood boil. He murders a child to save his paycheck and blames an alter ego named Zero. Drop your take in the comments. Does his excuse infuriate you as much as it does me? On the very first day of the highly anticipated capital murder trial, the courtroom was braced for a grueling, emotionally exhausting battle over guilt and innocence. But no one could have predicted what happened next. Tanner Horner stood before the judge and did the one thing no one expected. He pleaded guilty to both capital murder and aggravated kidnapping. By admitting his guilt right out of the gate, he completely bypassed the standard trial proceedings. The jury was immediately thrust into the heavy, soul-crushing burden of the punishment phase. Their only job now was to answer one ultimate, irreversible question. Does this monster spend the rest of his natural life rotting in a concrete cell, or does he face the death penalty?
It shows him slowly driving through Athena's neighborhood the day before her kidnapping.
At certain times covered up the cameras.
To prove that Horner deserved the ultimate punishment, prosecutors knew they had to show the jury exactly what he did. They played the blood-chilling hour-long audio recorded inside the pitch-black cargo hold of that FedEx van. As the horrific sounds of Athena fighting for her life echoed through the silent courtroom, the emotional toll was absolute. Grown men, hardened investigators, and every single member of the jury broke down. People were openly sobbing, physically shaking, and wiping away a constant stream of tears as they listened to the sheer terror inflicted on a helpless 7-year-old. I gotta be honest with you, just thinking about the heavy, suffocating grief in that room makes my chest tight. I'm curious, how would you feel sitting in that courtroom, forced to listen to the sounds of pure evil? The devastation reached an unimaginable peak when Athena's biological mother, Maitland, bravely took the witness stand. In her trembling hands, she tightly clutched a bright red bow, the exact same bow Athena was wearing in the photos taken just hours before she was snatched away. Through her immense grief and anger, Maitland stared down the man who destroyed her world. She didn't just share the beautiful memory of her vibrant little girl, she demanded answers. Because Athena's shirt was never recovered from the crime scene or his home, Maitland looked directly at Horner and asked a question that would shatter any parent's heart: "Where is my daughter's shirt?" It was a raw, agonizing plea for just a tiny piece of the truth that he was maliciously withholding. This is where the story takes a dark turn into his past, proving this wasn't just a sudden, isolated mistake. The horrifying truth is, Tanner Horner had a deeply sinister history of preying on the vulnerable. The prosecution called former victims to the stand, dragging his darkest secrets into the light. Two brave young women, Callan and Shay, looked their predator in the eye and testified that Horner had manipulated and assaulted them years earlier, back when they were only 16 years old. Their chilling testimonies established a clear, terrifying pattern of a predator. To seal his fate, forensic scientists took the stand to present the damning physical proof. They confirmed to the jury that male DNA was discovered on Athena's body. The scientific evidence completely shattered any last, desperate lie Horner tried to spin about the true nature of his horrific crime. Standing in the glaring light of a Texas courtroom, stripped of his fabricated excuses and his Zero alter ego, the monster was finally completely unmasked. Looking back at the entirety of this devastating, heart-wrenching journey, it is almost impossible to fully comprehend the sheer scale of the nightmare that unfolded in the otherwise quiet, sprawling town of Paradise, Texas. A routine afternoon, a highly anticipated Christmas package, and the innocent trust of a child were twisted into an unimaginable horror by a predator hiding in plain sight. We walked through the chilling timeline together, from the frantic, freezing nights of desperately searching the dark woods, to the blood-chilling realization of what the delivery truck's internal audio had secretly recorded, and finally, to the agonizing courtroom testimonies that completely unmasked the monster. It was an arduous, excruciating road for the dedicated law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to find her, and an absolute living hell for the grieving family. But inside that Fort Worth courtroom, the suffocating darkness of Tanner Horner's unspeakable crimes was met with an overwhelming, unbreakable wave of love and fierce solidarity. The gallery was completely transformed into a vibrant, beautiful sea of bright pink, Athena's absolute favorite color. Family members, friends, attorneys, and a deeply heartbroken but fiercely united community filled the wooden benches wearing pink shirts, pink ribbons, and pink ties. It was a powerful, visual testament to a vibrant little girl whose light could not be extinguished by one man's horrific acts. They weren't just there as mere spectators, they were there to stand as an impenetrable wall of support, ensuring that Athena's spirit, her joy, and her fierce fight were the things that truly dominated that room, not his pathetic evil. Faced with an ironclad, irrefutable mountain of evidence, there was absolutely nowhere left for this ruthless predator to hide. The haunting echoes of that hour-long audio recording, the damning precision of the forensic DNA analysis, the exceptionally brave testimonies of his past victims, and his own cold-blooded, calculating actions completely annihilated any desperate excuse he tried to fabricate. The justice system closed its grip around him with absolute, unwavering certainty, leaving no room for leniency. We all know the agonizing reality: no jury verdict, no prison sentence, and no ultimate punishment can ever rewind time. Nothing the court decides can magically bring back that sweet, 7-year-old Viking princess who loved singing Frozen songs and just wanted to play with her new Barbie dolls. The void left in the shattered hearts of her parents, her little sister, and her community is a permanent, aching scar. However, amidst that profound tragedy, there is a fierce, undeniable finality in the outcome. Because of the relentless pursuit of the truth and the overwhelming, crushing weight of the evidence, this cold-blooded killer will be permanently, irrevocably erased from society. He is locked away in a concrete cell, entirely stripped of his freedom, and he will never, ever have the opportunity to inflict this kind of nightmare on another innocent child again. The horror he brought into the world ends permanently with him. A satisfying, deeply necessary sense of true justice has finally been served in the precious name of Athena Strand. Finally, after unimaginable pain, justice was served. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching and for all the comments. You guys make this worth it.